The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Harrison's training ground as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her rifle scope for the third time. Around her, a group of male soldiers whispered and snickered, their voices carrying just loud enough for her to hear every cruel word. "Look at little Maria trying to play with the big boys again," said Corporal Jake Morrison, a burly man from Texas who never missed a chance to remind everyone that women didn't belong in combat roles. Maybe she should stick to cooking and cleaning. Maria's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes focused on the target 800 yards downrange. She had heard it all before. For 3 years at this base in rural Montana, she had endured the jokes, the whispers, and the constant doubt. Every day she had to prove herself twice as hard as any man just to earn half the respect. "She's probably seeing double through that scope," laughed Private Tommy Stevens, barely 19 and fresh out of basic training. "Women can't handle the pressure of real shooting." Maria took a deep breath and squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out across the empty field, and a moment later, the spotter called out, "Dead center, bullseye." The laughter stopped. Jake Morrison spat in the dirt and walked away, muttering under his breath. But Maria knew this small victory would be forgotten by tomorrow. It always was. Colonel James Patterson, the base commander, approached with his clipboard and stern expression. He was a man who believed in old-fashioned military values, which meant women belonged in support roles, not on the front lines. "Rodriguez," he said, not bothering to look at her target, "General William Hayes is visiting next week for the annual inspection. I want you on kitchen duty during his stay. We need to make a good impression, not showcase some feminist experiment." Maria's heart sank. General Hayes was a legend in the military world, a decorated war hero who had served in 3 conflicts. She had dreamed of meeting him, of showing him what she could do. Instead, she would be serving coffee and sandwiches while the men demonstrated their skills. "Sir, with respect, my marksmanship scores are the highest on the base," Maria said, her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. "I've qualified expert level 3 years running." Colonel Patterson finally looked at her, his eyes cold and dismissive. "Rodriguez, this isn't about your scores. This is about what's appropriate. General Hayes is from the old school. He doesn't need to see women pretending to be soldiers." The word pretending hit Maria like a physical blow. She had given everything to the army. She had sacrificed relationships, missed family gatherings, and pushed her body to its limits. She had earned every ribbon on her uniform, every rank on her sleeve. But to these men, she would always be pretending. "Yes, sir," she said through gritted teeth. That evening, Maria sat alone in her small quarters, cleaning her rifle with practiced precision. The weapon was her constant companion, the one thing that never judged her, never doubted her abilities. Her hands moved automatically, breaking down each component, cleaning and oiling every part. She thought about her father, Sergeant First Class Miguel Rodriguez, who had died in Afghanistan when she was 16. He had always told her that the army was about honor, duty, and protecting others. He had never mentioned that it was also about politics, prejudice, and proving yourself over and over again to people who would never truly accept you. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Lieutenant Rebecca Walsh, one of the few female officers on the base. Rebecca was in intelligence, a role more acceptable for women, but she had always been kind to Maria. "I heard about the kitchen duty," Rebecca said, stepping inside. "I'm sorry, Maria, it's not fair." "Fair doesn't seem to matter much around here," Maria replied, returning to her rifle. "I just have to keep my head down and do my job." "Your job is being a sniper, not a cook," Rebecca said firmly. "You're the best marksman on this base, and everyone knows it, even if they won't admit it." Maria appreciated the support, but it didn't change her situation. Tomorrow, she would start preparing for a week of serving meals instead of serving her country in the way she had trained for. Outside her window, the Montana mountains stood silent and proud against the darkening sky. Maria had grown up in those mountains, hunting with her father, learning to read the wind and calculate distance. This land was in her blood, and protecting it was her calling. She just wished the army could see her as more than a woman trying to play soldier. As she reassembled her rifle, Maria made a silent promise to herself. Someday, somehow, she would prove that she belonged here. She would show them all that stuff. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez was not pretending to be anything. She was exactly what the army needed, whether they realized it or not. The night was quiet except for the distant sound of trucks returning from evening exercises. Maria placed her rifle in its case and prepared for bed, unaware that in just a few days, everything would change. The test she had been preparing for her entire career was coming, and it would arrive in the most unexpected and dangerous way possible 3 days later. General William Hayes arrived at Fort Harrison with a convoy of black SUVs and enough security to protect a small country. Maria watched from the kitchen window as the distinguished 60-year-old officer stepped out of his vehicle, his uniform decorated with ribbons that told the story of a lifetime spent in service. She had hoped to catch a glimpse of the inspection, but Colonel Patterson had made sure she was buried in meal preparation, while the other soldiers demonstrated their skills and received commendations. Maria was stuck peeling potatoes and preparing coffee service. Rodriguez, the general, wants his coffee black, no sugar, barked Sergeant First Class David Murphy, the head of food services, and make sure you don't spill anything on that fancy uniform of his. Maria nodded, biting back her frustration. She had practiced for scenarios where she might have to provide overwatch for visiting dignitaries, had studied protection protocols and threat assessment. Instead, she was worried about coffee temperature. The morning inspection went smoothly. Maria served breakfast to the general and his staff, and Hayes himself was surprisingly polite, thanking her with genuine warmth. She noticed his sharp eyes, the way he seemed to take in everything around him. This was a man who had survived by paying attention to details. "Excellent coffee, Sergeant," he said, and Maria felt a small surge of pride despite the circumstances. "Thank you, sir," she replied. The afternoon was scheduled for weapons demonstrations and tactical exercises. Maria was assigned to clean up the dining area while the real soldiers showed off their skills. She was scrubbing tables when the ground beneath her feet began to shake. The first explosion came from the direction of the ammunition depot. Maria dropped her cloth and ran to the window just as a second, larger blast rocked the building. The windows shattered inward, showering her with glass. She threw herself under a table as debris rained down from the ceiling. When the shaking stopped, Maria crawled out from under the table, her ears ringing and her left arm bleeding from glass cuts. The dining hall was destroyed. Tables were overturned. The ceiling had partially collapsed, and smoke was pouring in from outside. She could hear screaming and shouting through the ringing in her ears. Maria grabbed her first aid kit from behind the serving counter and stumbled outside to see a scene from a nightmare. The ammunition depot was gone, replaced by a crater and burning debris scattered across hundreds of yards. The main barracks had partially collapsed. Soldiers were running in all directions, some carrying wounded comrades, others just trying to escape the falling ash and smoke. Maria's training kicked in. She ran toward the nearest group of wounded soldiers, her medical training taking over from the shock. Jake Morrison was lying on the ground, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle, blood seeping through his torn uniform. "Jake, stay still," she commanded, dropping to her knees beside him. "You've got a compound fracture, Maria." Jake's voice was weak, confused. I can't feel my leg." "You're going to be okay," she said, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. "Help is coming." She worked quickly, stabilizing his leg and treating two other wounded soldiers before the medics arrived. Only then did she allow herself to think about what had happened. This wasn't an accident. The explosions had been too coordinated, too precise. Colonel Patterson peered through the smoke, his uniform torn and his face blackened with soot. "Rodriguez, thank God. We need every able body for search and rescue, sir." "What about General Hayes?" Maria asked. Patterson's face went pale. "He's missing. He was in the Tactical Operations Center when the blast hit. The building collapsed, but we can't find him in the debris." Maria felt ice water in her veins. "What do you mean, missing?" "We've searched everywhere. Either he's buried so deep we can't find him, or—" Patterson trailed off. But Maria understood. Either the general was dead, or he had been taken. As the hours passed, the scope of the disaster became clear. The explosions had been caused by sabotage, carefully placed charges that had destroyed key buildings and created maximum chaos. 12 soldiers were confirmed dead, 23 wounded, and General Hayes was nowhere to be found. By evening, Maria found herself in the base's emergency command center, a hastily erected tent where Colonel Patterson was coordinating with FBI and military intelligence. She had been helping with communications, one of the few people still capable of operating the damaged radio equipment. Lieutenant Rebecca Walsh approached her with a grim expression. "Maria, we've got a problem. Intelligence thinks this was an inside job. Someone with access to the base helped plan this attack." Inside job. Maria felt sick. Who would do something like this? "We don't know yet, but whoever it was knew exactly when and where to strike for maximum impact. They knew the general's schedule, the location of our ammunition, everything." Maria stared out at the wreckage of the base she had called home for 3 years. Somewhere out there, General Hayes was either dead or in the hands of enemies, and somewhere among the people she had served alongside, there was a traitor. As night fell over Fort Harrison, Maria made a decision. She couldn't just sit in this tent and wait for updates. She was a sniper, trained in reconnaissance and tracking. While everyone else was focused on the immediate crisis, she could do what she did best: observe, analyze, and hunt. She slipped away from the command center and headed toward her quarters, which had been damaged but not destroyed. Her rifle case was buried under debris, but it was intact. As she pulled her weapon free and checked it for damage, Maria felt a familiar calm settle over her. The men who had mocked her, who had questioned her abilities, were either wounded or dead. Colonel Patterson was overwhelmed and out of his depth. The FBI agents were asking questions but had no real understanding of the base or its people. But Maria knew this place better than anyone. She knew every building, every fence line, every hiding spot within miles. If General Hayes was still alive, if there were clues to be found, she would find them. She loaded her rifle and slipped out into the Montana night, ready to do what she had been trained for. The mockery and dismissal were behind her now. This was her chance to prove that Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez was exactly the soldier the Army needed. Whether they had realized it or not, the Montana wilderness was Maria's element. While FBI agents stumbled through unfamiliar terrain with flashlights and city-trained search dogs, she moved like a shadow through the pine forests surrounding Fort Harrison. Her father had taught her to track deer in these same mountains, and now she was hunting much more dangerous prey. She had started her search at the destroyed Tactical Operations Center, where General Hayes had last been seen. While the official search teams focused on digging through the rubble, Maria examined the perimeter. The explosion pattern was wrong for a simple bombing. The charges had been placed to create chaos, not to kill everyone in the building. Kneeling beside a section of fence that had been cut and poorly repaired, Maria found what she was looking for: tire tracks leading away from the base. They were partially obscured by the rescue vehicles, but her trained eye could distinguish the deeper treads of a heavy truck from the standard military vehicles. Following the tracks was slow work in the darkness, but Maria had patience. She moved carefully, using her rifle scope to scan ahead for any signs of danger. The trail led northwest, toward the abandoned mining roads that crisscrossed the mountains. 3 hours into her pursuit, she found the first real clue. In a clearing, beside an old logging road, someone had stopped long enough to transfer cargo from one vehicle to another. Maria could see the scuff marks in the dirt, the depression where something heavy had been dragged. She knelt and examined the ground more closely. Boot prints, at least 3 different sets, and there pressed into the soft earth beside the tire tracks was something that made her blood run cold: a piece of torn fabric that matched General Hayes' uniform. Maria photographed the evidence with her phone and continued following the trail. The tracks led deeper into the mountains, toward areas she had hiked as a child but that most people avoided. This wasn't random. Whoever had taken the general knew this terrain. As dawn approached, Maria reached a ridge overlooking a valley that held the ruins of an old copper mine. The Broken Creek mine had been abandoned for 30 years, but the access roads were still passable, and the buildings, though deteriorating, could still provide shelter. Through her rifle scope, Maria could see fresh tire tracks leading down to the mine buildings. There were lights in what had once been the foreman's office, and she could make out at least 2 vehicles parked beside the main shaft building. She settled into a concealed position among the rocks and began her observation. This was what she had been trained for: patient, methodical surveillance. For 2 hours, she watched and waited, mapping the location, counting potential threats, looking for any sign of General Hayes. At 7:30 a.m., her patience was rewarded. A man emerged from the main building, and Maria's blood froze as she recognized him through her scope. It was Sergeant First Class David Murphy, the head of food services, who had been ordering her around just yesterday. Murphy was talking on a satellite phone, his voice carrying across the quiet valley. Maria couldn't make out the words, but his body language was agitated, aggressive. He was arguing with someone. A few minutes later, 2 more men emerged. Maria didn't recognize them, but they were clearly military or ex-military from their bearing and equipment. They were armed with assault rifles and moved with the confidence of trained soldiers. Then she saw him. General Hayes was brought out of the building, his hands bound behind his back but otherwise appearing unharmed. Even as a prisoner, the man carried himself with dignity and authority. One of the unknown men pushed him roughly toward a vehicle, but Hayes maintained his composure. Maria's finger moved to her rifle's trigger, but she forced herself to think tactically. 3 armed men, probably more inside the building, and the general in the middle of it all. A single shot might save Hayes, but it might also get him killed in the crossfire. She needed to understand the full situation before acting. Using her phone, she photographed everything she could see, documenting faces, vehicles, weapons. The FBI would need this evidence, but more importantly, she needed to understand what was really happening here. Murphy ended his phone call and walked over to General Hayes. Even from 400 yards away, Maria could see the anger in his movements. He grabbed Hayes by the shoulder and shoved him back toward the building. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was personal. Maria remembered Murphy's attitude over the past few months, his increasing bitterness about military policy, his complaints about political correctness and weak leadership. She had dismissed it as typical soldier griping, but now she wondered if there had been more to it. She spent another hour documenting everything she could observe. The kidnappers had established a routine. One man always remained with the general, while the others took turns on watch and handling communications. They were expecting someone or something, checking their watches and scanning the access road frequently. Maria realized she had a choice to make. She could return to the base, report what she had found, and wait for the FBI to organize a proper rescue operation. That would be the safe, by-the-book approach. Or she could do what she had been trained to do. Neutralize the threat and save the general herself. The official rescue would take hours to organize, and by then, the kidnappers might have moved Hayes, again, or worse. But if she acted alone and failed, both she and the general could end up dead. Maria thought about her father, about the stories he had told her of soldiers who had to make impossible choices in impossible situations. She thought about Colonel Patterson's dismissive attitude, about Jake Morrison's cruel jokes, about all the times she had been told she wasn't good enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't soldier enough. They were wrong. She was exactly the soldier. This situation required. Maria began planning her approach. The mine buildings were positioned around a central courtyard, with the main entrance facing the access road. There were multiple ways in and out, which worked to her advantage. The kidnappers were watching the road, not expecting anyone to approach. From the rocky hillsides, she would need to move closer, get into position for clean shots, and then act quickly and precisely. 3 targets, maybe more, and she would have to neutralize them all before any of them could harm General Hayes. As she prepared to move from her observation position, Maria felt a strange calm settle over her. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about proving herself or earning respect. She was simply doing her job, protecting an American general and upholding her oath to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The hunt was about to become a rescue mission, and Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez was ready. Maria spent 30 minutes planning her approach to the mine compound. The rocky terrain provided excellent cover, but she would have to move carefully to avoid alerting the kidnappers. Through her scope, she had identified 4 distinct threats: Murphy and 3 unknown accomplices, all armed and positioned around the main building. She made her way down the hillside, using every piece of cover available. Her father had taught her to move like the mountain cats that hunted these same slopes, silent, patient, and deadly when necessary. Each step was calculated, each pause strategic. The abandoned mine was laid out like a small town, with several buildings connected by gravel paths. The main office building where the kidnappers were holding General Hayes sat at the center, surrounded by equipment sheds and storage facilities. Maria could use these structures to get within 200 yards of her targets. As she moved into position, behind a rusted mining truck, Maria heard voices carrying across the morning air. Murphy was arguing with someone again, his voice raised and angry. The plan was supposed to be simple. Murphy was saying, "Create chaos, grab the general during the confusion, and get our message out." "Now you're talking about changing everything." "Plans change, Sergeant," replied an unfamiliar voice with a slight accent. "Our employer wants the general kept alive until the political situation develops further." Maria's blood chilled. This wasn't just about kidnapping a military officer. This was about politics, about using General Hayes as leverage in some larger scheme. She eased forward until she could see the speakers. Through a gap in the abandoned equipment, Murphy was facing 2 men in civilian clothes, while a third kept watch near the building entrance. General Hayes was nowhere visible, probably being held inside. "I didn't sign up for this," Murphy continued. I wanted to make a point about how weak our military leadership has become, not get involved in some international conspiracy. You took the money, the accented man replied coldly. That makes you involved whether you like it or not. Maria realized she was witnessing the collapse of the conspiracy from within. Murphy was having second thoughts, which made the situation even more dangerous. Desperate people made unpredictable choices. She needed to act soon, but first she had to locate General Hayes precisely. Moving carefully around the perimeter, Maria found a position where she could see through a window into the main building. Hayes was sitting in a chair, his hands still bound, but he appeared alert and unharmed. One guard sat across from him, weapon ready. The man was professional, probably ex-military like the others, but he was relaxed, not expecting trouble from this direction. Maria had her targets identified. 4 men, 2 outside, 1 inside, with the general and Murphy moving between positions. The shot sequence would have to be perfect. She would start with the outside guards, then take out the man inside before he could threaten Hayes. She settled into her firing position behind the mining truck. Her rifle rested on a stable makeshift bipod. The range was 180 yards, an easy shot in calm conditions, but she would have to fire multiple times rapidly and accurately. Taking a deep breath, Maria centered her scope on the first target, the man watching the access road. Her finger found the trigger, and she felt that familiar moment of absolute calm that came before a precision shot. The rifle cracked, and the first guard dropped silently. Maria was already swinging her scope toward the second target when Murphy looked up, alerted by some instinct that danger was near. Contact, Murphy shouted, diving for cover behind a pile of mining equipment. Maria's second shot took out the other outside guard, but now the element of complete surprise was gone. She could hear shouting from inside the building, and she knew the guard, with General Hayes, would be on high alert. Moving quickly but carefully, Maria repositioned herself to get a clear shot through the building's window. The guard inside had moved Hayes away from the window, and was using him as a human shield while scanning for threats. This was the nightmare scenario she had trained for. A hostage situation where one wrong move could cost an innocent life. Maria steadied her breathing and found her target through the scope. The guard was experienced, but he had made one crucial mistake. In his attempt to stay protected, he had positioned himself where Maria had a clear shot at his head without endangering the general. The third shot rang out, and the guard inside collapsed. Maria was already moving, knowing that Murphy and any remaining accomplices would be trying to flank her position. General Hayes, she called out, her voice carrying across the courtyard. This is Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, U.S. Army. Stay down and stay put. I'm coming to get you. Murphy's voice came from behind the equipment pile. Rodriguez, the little kitchen girl. You've got to be kidding me. Even now, even in this situation, he couldn't resist the insult. Maria felt a cold anger settle in her chest. He had just eliminated 3 armed men to save a general officer, and Murphy was still questioning her credentials. It's over, Murphy, she called back. Surrender now, and maybe you'll live to see a court-martial. Like hell, Murphy replied. You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing but a diversity hire who got lucky. Maria saw movement behind the equipment pile and fired a warning shot that sent sparks flying off the metal near Murphy's head. The FBI is on the way, she lied, hoping to force his surrender. Your friends are dead, your plan is blown, and your only choice now is how this ends. My plan was to show everyone how weak our military has become, Murphy shouted back. And look what they sent to rescue a general, one little girl with a rifle. Maria realized that Murphy wasn't going to surrender. His worldview couldn't accept that a woman had defeated his carefully planned operation. He would rather die than admit he had been wrong about her capabilities. She began moving systematically through the compound, using her training to clear each potential hiding spot. Murphy was good, but he was emotional now, angry and desperate. Maria was calm, focused, and fighting for something bigger than personal pride. The final confrontation came near the mineshaft itself. Murphy tried to ambush her as she rounded a corner, but Maria had anticipated the move. Her fourth and final shot ended the threat permanently. In the sudden silence that followed, Maria heard a sound that made her smile. Slow, deliberate applause. Coming from the main building, General Hayes emerged, having freed himself from his bonds using a piece of broken glass. His uniform was torn and dirty, but his bearing was unmistakably that of a commanding officer. Outstanding work, Sergeant Rodriguez, he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had commanded thousands of soldiers. I don't believe I've ever seen better tactical shooting under pressure. Maria lowered her rifle and stood at attention. Thank you, sir. "Are you injured?" "Nothing serious," Hayes replied, examining the compound with a professional eye. "For hostiles neutralized. Hostage recovered safely, and minimal collateral damage. Textbook precision operation." As sirens began to sound in the distance, Maria realized that everything had changed. She was no longer the woman trying to prove she belonged. She was the soldier who had just saved a general's life and exposed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the military. But the biggest changes were yet to come. The debriefing room at Fort Harrison was packed with officials Maria had never seen before. FBI agents, military intelligence officers, and Pentagon representatives filled every chair, all focused on the young woman who had single-handedly dismantled a kidnapping operation and saved a general's life. Colonel Patterson sat in the corner, looking like a man who had swallowed something bitter. For 3 days, every news outlet in the country had been running the story of Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, the female sniper who had been assigned to kitchen duty but ended up conducting one of the most successful solo rescue operations in recent military history. General Hayes himself led the debriefing, his respect for Maria evident in every question and comment. The investigation had revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Murphy had been recruited by a foreign intelligence service that wanted to embarrass the U.S. military and create political instability. The analysis of Murphy's communications shows this was part of a larger operation, General Hayes explained to the room. They were planning similar attacks on military installations across the country, using disgruntled personnel as inside help. Maria answered every question thoroughly and professionally, but her mind kept drifting to the reactions of her fellow soldiers. Jake Morrison, still recovering from his injuries, had visited her yesterday to personally apologize for 3 years of mockery and dismissal. Private Stevens had done the same, his face red with shame as he admitted he had been wrong about everything. "Sergeant Rodriguez," said Director Rebecca Thompson from the FBI, "your actions not only saved General Hayes but potentially prevented a series of terrorist attacks across multiple states. The intelligence we gathered from Murphy's communications has been invaluable." "I was just doing my job, ma'am," Maria replied, though she knew it was much more than that. General Hayes stood up, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, what happened here represents both a massive intelligence failure and an extraordinary example of individual courage and skill. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was underutilized and undervalued by this command, assigned to duties far below her capabilities." Colonel Patterson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, knowing where this was heading. However, Hayes continued, "Her actions over the past week have demonstrated exactly the kind of soldier our military needs in the 21st century. Adaptable, skilled, intelligent, and utterly committed to the mission and to protecting fellow Americans." The general walked over to where Maria was sitting. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I am personally recommending you for the Distinguished Service Cross, and I am also recommending your immediate promotion to Sergeant First Class." The room erupted in applause, but Hayes wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am offering you a position with the Joint Special Operations Command. Your skills are wasted in a conventional unit, and our nation needs soldiers of your caliber in roles that match their abilities." Maria felt tears threatening for the first time. Since the whole ordeal had begun, Joint Special Operations Command was the elite of the elite, the units that handled the most sensitive and dangerous missions. It was an opportunity she had never dared to dream of. "Sir, I would be honored," she managed to say, as the debriefing concluded and the officials began to file out. Colonel Patterson approached Maria with obvious reluctance. "Rodriguez," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I let my personal biases cloud my judgment about your capabilities. What you did was extraordinary, and I was wrong to limit your opportunities." Maria looked at the man who had dismissed her, who had assigned her to kitchen duty while she could have been serving her country in more meaningful ways. She could have been angry, could have told him exactly what she thought of his old-fashioned military values. Instead, she chose grace. "Colonel, we all have room to grow and learn. I hope this experience helps the Army make better decisions about utilizing all of our soldiers' talents in the future." Patterson nodded and walked away, looking older than his years. General Hayes approached as the room emptied. "Walk with me, Sergeant," he said. They stepped outside into the Montana afternoon, where reconstruction crews were rebuilding the damaged base. The mountains stood eternal and proud against the blue sky, unchanged by the human drama that had played out in their shadows. "I want you to know something," Hayes said. "When I was captured, when I was sitting in that chair listening to Murphy and his accomplices plan their next moves, I wasn't thinking about rescue by some elite tactical team. I was thinking about the soldiers I had met during my inspection, wondering if any of them had the skills and courage to find me. He paused, looking out at the mountains. Honestly, you weren't on that list. Not because you weren't capable, but because I had fallen into the same trap as Colonel Patterson. I saw you serving coffee and made assumptions about your role and abilities. Maria listened without commenting, allowing the general to finish his thoughts. But when I heard your voice calling out in that courtyard, when I saw how professionally and precisely you had handled the entire situation, I realized something important. The Army's greatest asset isn't our technology or our strategies, it's our people. And we can't afford to waste any of our people based on outdated assumptions. 3 months later, Maria stood in the Virginia woods, wearing the tan beret of the Army Rangers and preparing for her first mission with Joint Special Operations Command. Her new team included some of the most skilled and experienced soldiers in the military, and they had accepted her not as a female soldier or a diversity initiative, but simply as a highly skilled operator who had proven herself under the most extreme circumstances. The story of the lone female sniper who had saved General Hayes had become legend in military circles. But Maria rarely thought about it now. She was focused on the future, on missions that would challenge every skill she possessed, on serving her country at the highest level. As she checked her equipment one final time, Maria thought about her father, about the pride he would have felt seeing her where she was now. She thought about the young women who might follow in her footsteps, who might face fewer obstacles because she had proven what was possible. But mostly, she thought about the mission ahead, about the teammates who depended on her, about the oath she had sworn to protect and defend. Staff Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she had always been meant to do. The mockery and doubt were behind her now, replaced by respect and opportunity. She had not just survived the blast that changed everything, she had used it to become the soldier she was always meant to be. In the distance, a radio crackled with mission orders, and Maria smiled as she prepared to answer the call. The hunt was about to begin again, and this time, she was hunting with the best soldiers in the world, as an equal among equals.